Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We will get started at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so please set up your audio and video, and we will begin shortly. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for a webinar from the National Association of EMS Educators. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. And if you are brand new to the NCEE webinar series, we're very glad that you joined us today. Before we get started, I'll fill you in on some of the controls available to you today. Attendees are in mute-only mode, but please submit your questions or comments by typing them in the chat panel on your Zoom screen. All questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel and website following the presentation's conclusion. NCEE offers 1 hour of CAPCE-approved CE credit for those who attend today's live webinar. There are a few steps to receive the CE certificate. I will send a link in the chat at the end of this presentation and include it in tomorrow's follow-up email. You must follow that link and register for your CE certificate on the NCEE website. NCEE members receive the certificate free of charge, and it is $25 for non-members. Today's webinar is titled Why Me? Combating Imposter Syndrome and the EMS Educator, presented by Kory A. I'm going to pass it over to our presenter now. Kory, thank you so much for being here today to share your knowledge and experience with us, and we look forward to the presentation.
Great, thank you. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep, you sound good.
Awesome. We'll get started. As you already said, today's topic is combating imposter syndrome in the EMS educator, and focused on the question of why me? And I'm sure it's a question that many of us have faced, either starting out our career or within our career during the time frame. So good to see that quite a few people have joined us for the discussion today, and hopefully the YouTube video will be utilized as well to help others that may be combating this syndrome that unfortunately many of us will, if we haven't already, faced. So about me, just quickly get the normal introductions out of the way. A little Jimmy Buffett of I'm Nobody from Nowhere. My name is Kory A. Been in EMS now for a little over 20 years. Started out like most of us within 911 EMS, and then eventually moved over to critical care most recently. And there you see my current and former full-time agency, CareLink, from Cone Health in Greensboro, North Carolina, where I worked as a critical care paramedic, still with them part-time, and full-time now as the program director for our EMS program at Piedmont Community College in North Carolina. And so with that, bring a little experience not only from the program director standpoint, but the educator and the student perspective in looking at this topic with how we deal with that imposter syndrome that haunts us many times. And so our objectives today, we're looking to gain an understanding of what exactly imposter syndrome, or as it's often or started out being called, imposter phenomenon. We'll gain an understanding of what it is, both the definition of it and the history behind it. And so the phenomenon syndrome kind of gets used interchangeably. So we'll discuss how imposter phenomenon, again, as it was first called or later termed syndrome, impacts the EMS educator, and then the impacts within the educational realm that it has outside just the person. And we'll hopefully look at some strategies to combat imposter phenomenon and help either address it in ourselves or those we may be working with or supervise. So I have to admit, a little start out here that some imposter syndrome with this kick in for me. First presented this talk in 2021 at the NCEE Symposium in Florida. And like many of the topics that we discuss after the presentation, kind of put it on the shelf, set it aside, didn't do a whole lot more with it. You know, it had made its conference appearance. And then earlier this year, I was asked if I would consider presenting this again as a webinar for NCEE members and others that choose to join us in this webinar format. And, you know, it didn't take much convincing there on NCEE's part for me to be willing to do that, but jumped in, started to revise and update the presentation a little bit. And then lo and behold, spring comes about, and there's a excellent article in the Educator update that NCEE publishes from Hillary Wilson, you and Dr. Young, with a very similar title, looking at the same topic of imposter syndrome. Who do you think you are? And, you know, kind of kicks in for me. Who do you think you are talking about this when, you know, we have others out there just as focused on this topic? So, you know, hopefully I can help add a little bit to the discussion and do the topic some justice, as you know, we follow up right after their article is published for you as well. So as we look at imposter syndrome, there's several things we have to consider, and one of the things is the misconceptions with it. A lot of people think, well, you know, it's just a personal thing. It's something that people have to deal with. They have to get over it. It's just their nerves. It's stage fright. And that's simply not the case. This is something that goes beyond, that digs in further into an individual that really shouldn't be struggling with this, you know, so-called stage fright or nerves. These are highly achieving individuals. They are well qualified for what they're doing. They have the insight, they have the knowledge, they have the background to be in the roles that they're in. But for some reason, they rely on an external view of their achievement and success, and refuse to or battle the internalization of that success for a variety of reasons. They resist that ability to look at themselves and say, yes, I did achieve this. Yes, I did do a good job. Yes, I did do this work to get where I am currently. And it becomes a struggle that becomes deeply rooted in their professional life. And so we really, as the sign here says, have to take the direction of truth and avoid the lies to either serve ourselves the best or those that we work with in digging out of this kind of unrealistic belief that we struggle with within imposter syndrome. And so, how many people remember your first class? First class that you were asked to teach, think back to it, would probably look something like this. We're at the corner of the classroom, the back of the classroom, behind the curtain on the stage, peering out, because we rely a lot of times on the sage on stage model, especially for those new instructors, the ones that were checking boxes for their instructor credentials, or they're learning, they're just transitioning from maybe being a skills instructor to the classroom environment. We don't give them a lot of leeway. It's here, pick a topic. If you're lucky, if you're not lucky, the topic's assigned and told, hey, jump in, jump up front of the class, teach this, talk about it, and we want your students to come out knowing everything there is to know about this topic, ready to perform whatever skill, pass whatever exam, move forward. And so how did that feel to us? Probably something like this photo. Probably a good representation here, because, our stomach is now suddenly tied in knots. We've peered out that curtain and now we're forced out on the stage, and the class is relying on us. The administrators are relying on us. Everybody's looking for that wealth of knowledge to fall out, and it's suddenly not that great of a feeling. It's not what we thought it was going to be. It's not all it's cracked up to be. And so one of the authors we'll talk about with this is Parker Palmer, who wrote an excellent book called The Courage to Teach. And he discusses how teaching really makes us vulnerable. We're on the spot, our knowledge is on the spot, or even worse, the limits of our knowledge are on the spot. And we're really in that vulnerable state, exposed to students, administrators, anybody countering our teaching, trying to find that one instance of something we misspeak, we don't know the most current research on, something that was missed in the textbook, something you just misspoke. And you and all of that knowledge is on the line in what for us is a very high stakes career, a very high performing profession that we're in. And so we have to imagine living with that day by day, which is what really someone in the realm of imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon does. The stakes are very high. It not only affects our career affects our livelihood if we don't maintain our employment, if our employment is shattered at one college or agency. EMS talks, we know that same news, that same bad reputation is going to proliferate the area. It's going to follow us. We're going to struggle. We may have to dip back into a lower level position or exit the profession. We have all those, most of the time, unrealistic thoughts of how severe the impact to not only our career, our livelihood, and ultimately who we are, because we identify in this profession a lot by who and what we are. We're a paramedic, we're a paramedic educator, we're a program director, we're a critical care paramedic. We have varying levels that are really very personal to each of us. And so full-time education can make this a consistent fear that people battle day in and day out, whether they admit to it or whether we realize it or not. And that's something that you and Dr. Young both pointed out in their work, that we're in a high pressure, high stakes environment. We have a pressure to be perfect. You know, how many of us went through class and it was who needs a field guide? Or we're an instructor and it's who turns out the best students? Or let's not even consider the COAMPS numbers that we have to post on the success of our students. We also, as I point out, have to keep current and changing knowledge. And how many of us have went through changes and even more changes on our practice as a paramedic? You know, may have started in the days of lidocaine, and then quickly we transitioned to no, lidocaine's bad. Now we're kind of back in the hey, let's use lidocaine. And so with this constant changing high pressure environment, it can be a struggle. And that is always on a vulnerable state when you walk in front of a classroom. And so also face it, our profession draws a certain type of person. And that's where it also draws in imposter phenomenon. Imposter phenomenon first termed in 1978 by Clance and Imes, two psychologists doing research, and they termed it imposter phenomenon. At the time, they studied highly achieving women. And what they looked at was that the women they interviewed, no matter what position they were at within their company or agency or wherever they might be, they always attributed success to other external factors. It was never something they had done. It was always luck. It was always right place at the right time. No one else could do the job. They were the only one willing. So they looked and saw that they would never internalize this. They would never say that it was based off their own knowledge or work or ability. And they also noted at the same time, with looking at highly achieving women, that these women often also lack role models that look like them within these agencies, and attributed some to what we later see and we'll talk about as a cultural problem or a cultural impact that imposter syndrome can bring. And so the way they defined it was self-declared imposters fear that some significant person will discover that they are indeed intellectual imposter. So like here, our famous Scooby-Doo cartoons, it was always a imposter ghost that at some point was unmasked. And it was always with and I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids. Well, who do we all have as meddling kids? We have our students. And that's who we're afraid of becoming, those meddling kids that unmask us as the imposter, the individual that really shouldn't be where they're at, shouldn't be educating paramedics, doesn't really know what they're doing. They've just somehow skated by for this length of time. And so as we talk about imposter phenomenon more, and we've already hit on some of this, the feelings of success are not your own. There is some external source that has dealt you what you have gained. The feelings are pervasive. They're a long-term effect. It's not something that is short-lived or just, I got this one assignment, because this is pervasive through kind of the career point that we're at now. We see the external measures rather than thinking about what we've done. It's not that we had a certification. It's not that we studied a topic. It was today's webinar. Nancy didn't have anybody else to speak type thought process. And so it shifts our focus away from the success and has us focused on the feelings. And what does this look like? Again, I was in the right place at the right time. I've been lucky. There was no one else to take the job. Someone had to do the project, or I was the low bid. And we think of this, even though there is plenty of external evidence of our success. And we see kind of that face off here, with the gorillas between that evidence of success that's saying, yes, you've done the right things, you've prepared yourself for this, you're gaining what you worked for, versus the kind of larger, overwhelming view of, again, why me? Why wasn't it somebody else? And this is not to say that, as educators, we still shouldn't maintain a healthy dose of humility, because certainly we need to maintain that. Going back again to Parker Palmer's work, he says humility is the only lens through which great things can be seen. And that's true. We have to remember those things that bring us back to get our head out of the clouds and get us back into what is truly reality. And we have to remember and honor those that came before us, may have set the stage for us. We've all had help. We've all had mentors. We all may here and there have caught a break of some type. There are different things that do play into our success, and we don't ignore those. We're thankful for them, but we know that all of that has played in and been a part, as well as the work that we have actually done. It's paved the way for us. So our success, however, might not have been possible without the mentors, those that have guided us, those that have set paths for us. It's also not possible if we don't put in our own effort, our own work, our own knowledge, our own talents into utilizing, cashing in on these opportunities that are presented to us. And so it's like taking that example of there was no one else. No, that's incorrect. I'm sure when I was hired for this position as program director, there were others. Some may have wanted more money to have taken the job. Others would have probably taken the job for the same amount or less than I would have, but maybe they didn't prepare themselves. Maybe they didn't have the certifications, the background in EMS. I'm sure plenty of people would try things for a decent salary and fill out paperwork and do the best they could, but that doesn't mean that they met the qualifications. The job had a job description. The job had qualifications, things that you have to have and bring with you to fill into these roles. And so that's the thing we often forget when we disregard and lose that aspect of ourselves and our effort and think about, well, I got it because there was no one else. No, that's simply not true. Ship was staying afloat before you got there. Someone else can do it, but obviously not maybe the level or the contribution that is being sought. And so it's also not just a lack of confidence. It is truly a significantly irrational belief. It's not something that we can just help a person explain away. You're being irrational with this, straighten up and realize that you've done the right thing just doesn't fly. We have to dig more into the problem of imposter syndrome and realize it's just not that easy. So where's the research with imposter syndrome going? It's still looking in some realms of the impact to women and minority populations. Again, the aspects of environment and role models and having a view of people that are in the positions that you have reached, that look like you, think like you, talk like you, are very similar to you. But we've also expanded and looked at how phenomenon doesn't discriminate against individuals. It can apply to all of us and likely will at some point in time. And then back in 2011, to make it more of a pathological approach rather than a phenomenon, Gomez and Morales returned imposter phenomenon into imposter syndrome, making it something more of a diagnosis based work. And so currently we have a cognitive focus with it, some minority centered research, and then environmental research, looking both at developmental environments, places like our classroom, where it could impact our students, or the workplace, with it impacting us or, potentially instructors that we may have working for us. And if we think about culture and we think about EMS culture, we can quickly see how this can really play in to affect our profession. Again, as we look at how high stress, high risk, the type of people that are attracted to the profession, all of this plays in together to make a truly unique environment for us in the EMS profession. So why is this important to us? Well, it could be important to us ourselves if we're the ones starting to recognize and feel this kind of wrench in our gut day in, day out, and realizing that, okay, now we're in this kind of rut of imposter syndrome and it's something we need to dig ourselves out from. It could be something that we notice in instructors, and we'll talk in a minute about some different signs and different things we may see as it develops. So it may be something that we need to help dig an instructor or a colleague out of and help them to realize kind of the self-harm that they're doing when they play into the imposter syndrome and they let it kind of govern and dictate what they do. And then it can also attack our students. Students are, again, just like us, they're under high pressure to succeed. They're that same type of person that's drawn to the EMS profession. They're looking to be a high achiever. They're looking to be one of the top in their class to get the job or the agency that they want. It's a competitive nature, and that competition and that culture can quickly, overwhelm them just as easily as it does us. And they start to wonder why they were chosen, why they were given a seat in the paramedic classroom, why they should be the one taking care of these patients, because they've had all these instructors that come in that have to them so much more knowledge, and they start to compare, why are they not thinking about scenarios in the same way that maybe one of the instructors is, and they fail to realize that the instructor has years and years of experience or additional education that is contributing to their view and understanding, and we're just trying to get them to the point of being, as National Registry would say, entry level competent. We want them to be at a stage where they can start the same career that we did years and years ago. And so, just to give you an idea of the impact, if we try to, say this is never going to affect me, this is not an issue, this is not something I'm going to see. Well, statistically, it's more probable than not that you will, because about 70% of people are impacted by imposter phenomenon at some point. And so when we think about it within healthcare, it was, first found in 1978 in highly achieving women, but then it was identified in the early 90s, so not that long after that, within nursing. And imposter syndrome, when it takes a hold into the healthcare workers, whether it be nurses, doctors, dentists, EMTs, paramedics, whoever the case may be, it takes hold and it starts to constrain our growth and our learning. It's not something that easily dissipates. Again, it's not something we can ignore. It's not something that we can push to the side. Instead, it is a paralyzing fear that, in its worst case, can paralyze people from actually reaching their full potential, from taking on new challenges, from progressing further within their career and their work, to paralyzing them to the point that they leave the EMS profession or the EMS instructional profession. And actually spoke with an individual after the last time I presented this that wanted to say, thank you for bringing the topic up and talking about it, because it was something that they had experienced years before that pushed them out of EMS instruction. They had been working as an instructor for quite a while, had great reviews in the classroom, great scores. They weren't being pushed out the door, but just suddenly that imposter syndrome kicked in and the fear paralyzed them to the point that they left the instructional profession and just went back on a truck. Thought, there was nothing that they could contribute, despite their supervisors saying, hey, stay, you're good, you need to do this. And unfortunately, they, I don't guess, had a framework to understand and try to help the individual work through the difficulties either, to keep them contributing as they were to the students. And so the individual went back to EMS on a truck for quite a while before eventually the fear subsided. They returned to the classroom and they said, hey, I always wondered what happened. I never could figure it out until listening to the presentation, and now it was even more helpful understanding that this occurred and knowing there's a name for it, knowing that they weren't the only one that this ever impacts. And so with that, it's well documented in healthcare. Again, we're highly achieving, we're in a high pressure environment, and So it impacts us. It could impact us as an educator. It could impact us even as a provider, because we're always in that competition to be the one that, you know, discovers the mystery illness that's clinically presenting in our patient, to be the one that, you know, saves the patient from some wild random disease that nobody else would have ever suspected. And that's just, it's an unrealistic, oftentimes unnecessary pressure that we put on ourselves and we put on each other in the EMS culture. So with providers, the effects that it has is it really becomes associated with a psychological distress. These people often display significant signs of anxiety and depression, and that battle with the anxiety and depression leads to a physical and mental exhaustion that occurs. And with that, we often find maladaptive behaviors that make their way into their work, whether that be through procrastination or perfectionism, or both. By bringing those into our work, by procrastinating and putting something off, or continuing to work on something, trying to achieve that level of perfectionism, then again, we take the blame off ourselves and make it some other external factor's fault if there is a failure, if there's something wrong. By procrastinating, we say, well, you know, I ran out of time. It would have been better if. And by doing that, the blame is no longer on us that we failed. It's the time. We didn't have time to do it. We ran out of time to do it. And so by putting it off, we've removed that blame, we think, from ourselves. The same in perfectionism. We seek to make it perfection. We always want the best there is, absolutely perfect, no errors, because we feel like those come back on us. And as long as we continue that cycle of revise, relook at it, revise again, relook at it, then it's never really complete. It's never really handed off. It's never really done in our final product. And so that maladaptive behavior of perfectionism or procrastination, or a combination of both, makes us anxious. We're fighting deadlines, may lead again to some depression. We become exhausted, and what does that eventually look like? One of the huge battles that we talk about in healthcare now, burnout. And quickly we start to look like the pile of ashes in the desk chair. We're burnt out. We can't focus. We can't maintain the level of performance that got us to where we were at. And so now it's your turn again to think about a question. Who's the priority in our EMS classroom? And so I thought about putting in a couple of polls here, you know, asking, has anybody faced imposter syndrome, or knew somebody that had, or, you know, putting in a poll here for who's the priority in the classroom. But didn't really want to put anybody on the spot on kind of what's already a touchy subject for us, although we'll find that talking about it is really one of the best things we can do. But probably your knee-jerk response to who's the priority in our EMS classrooms was to say the student. Seems like the logical answer. But think about the first EMS course you took, whether that EMS course has been recently and in the age of in title capnography and fast exams, or whether your EMS course was way back when we had horse-drawn ambulances and first report was chiseled on a stone tablet and you just transported Noah after you ran the arc around. It doesn't matter. Consistently throughout EMS education, we talked about the first priority is ourselves. Why do we change that when we come to the EMS classroom? We teach over and over to our students, you're first, your partner, then your patient. We hound scene safe BSI so much that it ought to be National Registry slogan, at least till they get everything changed over. And we harp and harp on that, but yet when we get to the classroom, we don't think about it as ourselves, our co-instructors, and then our students. We put them at the top a lot of times to our detriment. And we need to think about, is that really the route we need to go, or do we need to invest a little more in ourselves? Again, Parker Palmer talks about it in a sense of teaching as technique is what teachers use until the real teacher arrives. And we need to find as many ways as possible to help that teacher show up. And that's what we're getting at here is we need to engage and make sure that we're showing up as teachers, bringing here, as you see, the heart to instruction rather than simply relying on the technique. And if you're facing imposter syndrome, bringing that heart to instruction is just impossible. We can't rely on the fear of that one student, the program director, the dean, we're going to be outed, we're going to be found as a fraud. We've got to, as instructors, teachers, be willing to be in that vulnerable state and let that real teacher address and work with the classroom. And in doing that, we end up teaching from the heart. We teach as ourselves. We rely on our students gaining the knowledge that we have, and we have to put ourselves in a state of vulnerability where our status as experts does kind of fall on the line. And we know eventually we're all going to have it. That worst day when we've been up late preparing for the class or paperwork was due to the state to not delay a new class, we're tired. There's going to be that student that shows up with the gotcha type EKG, the one that, hey, what's this EKG look like to you? And as soon as you muddle your way through trying to read this random EKG with no patient presentation and them just tapping their foot for the answer, you give the answer and they come back with, well, that's not what the doctor said. Is that really the focus that we need to put our energy toward? Is those one-off moments, or what we can do as educators for the entire group of students, for ourselves, for others in the educational profession? And so we have to realize that we have that environment that unfortunately fosters imposter phenomenon. Been significant research in all levels of healthcare with it. Again, arises in spaces of high achievement where judgments about merit are made and affect 70% of people. And the key one there is that environment of judgment on merit. Doesn't sound like us, does it? It totally sounds like the EMS profession. We judge in trucks, we judge in class, we judge on the scene. I mean, for the most part, Eating Our Young probably should be a chapter of FTO training. That's what we do. And unfortunately, that's what gets us into these situations. And so your imposter syndrome ends up presenting as true distress and fear that the luck is going to run out. It impacts their physical, psychological, and professional well being. They may avoid opportunities for fear they'll fail at them. And that failure, if it does occur, is a huge hit to their self esteem as opposed to others that may not be in this current situation. Often impedes their practice and potential and impacts their ability to lead. And unfortunately, as educators in a classroom, that's something crucial to us. We have to be able to lead. That's what the students are coming expecting us to do, is to lead them to the knowledge that they need as they're starting out their careers. And so, kind of jokingly here, we think, my life coach just informed me that I didn't make the team. How do we get out of that mindset? We have to think about comparing things at our level, not a level above us, not a level below us, but how do we compare at our level? Focus on our own achievements and not necessarily the hoops or even the failures that we've had. Remember that scholarship is only a portion of us. It doesn't make up everything that we do. We have to try as best we can to avoid the social media trap. Remember, people don't post their failures on social media. They post the good. They post when they pass an exam, pass a certification, gain a promotion. They don't post when they get written up, when they get a failure in something. So avoid the social media trap to think that everything else is positive for everybody but me, and I can't risk a failure and looking bad. We need to look for the useful feedback, and we'll talk about that more in a minute when we talk about helping our instructors. Remember that rejection's normal. Over and over again, we may try and we may fail. Eventually, if we do our work, if we learn from those experiences, if we put effort in, success will come. But we just have to stop allowing ourselves to feed off that vague, I'm just not smart enough type approach. Think about our strengths and weaknesses and look toward mentors, or even the concept of a personal level advisory board. Maybe it's not just one person that you rely on. Maybe somebody, gives you advice in personal life, someone else in professional life, someone else in teaching and teaching techniques, but develop those relationships or those systems of support that help you help yourself. We recognize it in instructors. We have to realize that it can manifest as them overworking, hiding their abilities, or hiding behind a mentor to cope. That way they can push the blame if something was to happen off onto the other person. It wasn't them that really did it. We should encourage them through coaching, not training. It's not something that we can teach our way through. It is an error on our part if we're a manager to not look at the environment we're creating. Are we creating a place where they feel like they have the ability to safely fail, where they feel like it's not a complete hit to their person or their livelihood or their continued employment if something happens? We also should anticipate it. New jobs, new careers, or new projects are often the triggers of an imposter syndrome. We should think about how they could thrive with immediate feedback, getting that immediate input into not only how to improve, but what they've done good, And with that, thinking about valuable feedback, not just, well, you did a good job or that was a good lecture, but feedback that expands on what they've done rather than just good lecture. How about detailing out, way to draw questions from the students to discuss pitfalls of hypertension and a traumatic brain injury? Something that is significant, that is thoughtful, that is tangible, that they can hang their hat on this achievement, not just, well, I did a good job. What does that mean? What part of it was good? I got my name right when I introduced myself. You know, giving them that value, and not just negative, but also positive things to reflect and think about. Avoid letting them reframe their success and push it off on external factors or irrationalities such as luck. Reassuring them that no, luck had nothing to do with your selection in the interview process. You were, chosen as the top candidate. Frame setbacks as natural part of the growth process and encourage that growth mindset. We all learn as we come into a new job, a new career. Frame that as part of an expected process, not a surprise that you've already screwed something up. And again, control that environment. Make sure it centers on learning and not necessarily just on competition. So, some final thoughts. A few song lyrics here that some people may recognize. Tales old as time, Tina's old song, bittersweet and strange, finding you can change, learning you were wrong. Left this in, had to put it in when I first presented this discussion or presentation in Florida as you know a ode to Disney, because of course, as you should know, that comes from Beauty and the Beast. And so really it describes imposter syndrome. It's a tale as old as time, something as old as song. We've known about it since and talked about it since 1978. It is strange, but there are ways to change and things that we can think about doing to realize how we or those maybe that we are helping address this are wrong in their beliefs, and dispelling those irrationalities. So as we come to the end, getting within a few minutes of our hour time together, leave you with one concluding thought from again Parker Palmer. If we want to grow as teachers, we must do something alien to academic culture. We must talk to each other about our inner lives. Risky stuff in a profession that fears the personal and seeks safety in the technical, the distant, and the abstract. So again, we've got to get out of that safe zone of technical, distant, and abstract. Talk to each other, realize that it's not something that we face alone, but rather something that is going to impact the majority of us at some point if it hasn't already, and something that we should be talking about and helping each other through and discussing, just like we do with the focuses on burnout as a practitioner. We need to be thinking about this as contributing to burnout in our profession as educators. And with that, I'll just end with a quick thank you.
Great, thank you, Kory. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to submit those in the chat. I also put in the link to obtain your CEU, so I'll leave that up for a little bit as well, and I will also send it in tomorrow's follow-up email. Well, okay, if there's no questions, then we will conclude this webinar. Kory, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your experience with us. We really appreciate it.
Welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. Take care.
All right, have a great day, everybody. Bye.